Yeah. Beef is what's for dinner. And in some cases, breakfast and lunch. I am Vinnie Tortorich, folks. Your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. It's the Friday show. You know what that means. We bring someone in that's way more intelligent than me. And as it turns out, it's not that hard to do. I could have walked outside and found somebody just walking the neighborhood, and that would have been good enough. But no, we went one step further. I always joke about these guys. I call them doctors without shirts. And he might be the leading doctor without a shirt. But boy, he deserves, if I looked like this guy, I wouldn't even own a shirt. He's been on the show before. I'm talking about esteemed Dr. Anthony Chaffee. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Yeah, some people think I actually, you and I were in the same building the first time I uttered those words. Someone said something at a thing, and I said, "Oh, you mean doctors without shirts?"
Yeah.
And you guys are a whole new generation. You're actually, in most cases, MDs. There might be a couple of PhDs in there. But I joke about it, but I secretly like it because if you put you, Sean Baker, who's close to my age, Saladino, any of these guys, Nathan, I can't think of his last name. I want to say Nathan Pritikin, but boy, that would be can't think of his name. Another one without all MDs, put them next to, I don't know, a few names that might come up. Dr. McDougall, Michael Greger. Get all of you guys without a shirt on and look at the diets. Is it enough said at that point? Do we even have to do a study? Right? What say you? I mean, you've seen these guys with shirts on and you go, my God, whatever you do, don't let that shirt fail. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a lot of them too that, people that say, well, that's not fair. Anthony and these other people, they were athletes, they work out all the time and all that stuff. And yes, I was an athlete. Dr. Baker is an athlete and played at high levels. But at the same time, I haven't had an opportunity to work out to the same degree as I used to. It really is my diet that's maintaining, the work that I've built up over years previously. But I always joke around to people that Dr. Greger actually works out more than I do, because he's always on a treadmill. He's always doing something. He's always showing, hey, look how fit I am. Look at how active I am. And I am not. I don't have the time for that. And so, he's always constantly exercising. I am not constantly exercising. And yet, I have been able to maintain a sort of, lean muscular physique. And I do think that that's a testament, because when I was just eating vegetables and lean meat and bits of, whole foods, I wasn't eating garbage. It was difficult for me to maintain my fitness level. It was difficult for me to maintain my shape and my body fat percentage in between seasons. So, when I was playing rugby and I was pushing myself, I would get in very good shape regardless of what I was eating. But it was a lot easier to do that eating the way I do now. But in between seasons, if I was, had a month off or whatever, summer off or something like that, I would lose muscle mass and I would put on body fat very quickly, whereas now I don't. And like that is a stark difference that I've noticed from different ways of eating.
It's funny you should say that, because I guess I'm a cross between you and Greger, because I do. And by the way, we're not using Dr. Greger in a disparaging way. We're just making a point that the man doesn't look healthy at all. And he espouses just, eating vegan, not touching any kind of meat. It's right there on his website where he says, even if you eat one egg a week, you will develop type 2 diabetes. And I don't even want to get into that minutia because that's just nuts. But I'm between you and Greger because I do exercise a lot. It's something that I don't know if I do it for my brain. I don't know why I still do it. I'm 61. But, just yesterday, I put in 2 hours on a rowing machine. Who does that unless you're getting ready to row the Atlantic Ocean? Right? You just don't put that kind of time in. So that's a lot of aerobics. And as you know, you do a lot of aerobics, you can end up losing, eating up a lot of muscle mass. But I also go to the gym and I work out. And all of my gym buddies will say to me, wow, for 61, you keep on a fair amount of muscle for a guy who just basically chronic aerobics on top of it, right? I'm just an exercise fiend. And the question is always, well, obviously you're on, TRT or HRT or whatever they're calling that stuff now, just taking low grade amounts of testosterone. And the fact is, at 61, I have never taken any kind of steroid ever, unless the doctor gave me cortisol for some kind of ailment way back when. I've never taken a testosterone style steroid in my life. And I have people, and I love it. I take it as a compliment. It's like, wow, they think I'm on, some testosterone. I'm doing something right. And the testosterone that I'm on, albeit I don't do it as much as you do because I do eat some vegetables, is red meat, chicken, fish, and all crustacean. I love seafood more than I think anyone in the world. Did I mention eggs? I mean, these are these are my staples. And to your point, my wife, who spent her life as a model, from the time she was 16 until, and then she went from model to actress. I mean, you got to stay thin. And okay, Serena has incredible genetics, right? She's 61. She's 5'7" or 5'8", and she still weighs 130 pounds. And people will go, well, genetically. I've seen her sisters, who beautiful women, by the way, beautiful women. Kristen keeps her weight down because she's on screen all the time. But it's difficult as you get older, right? And Serena always says exactly what you said. She's saying, God, back when I was 16, I was smoking cigarettes in order not to eat. I didn't know it could be this easy where you could just eat whatever you want to eat and still not gain weight. What say you?
Well, I think it's very important what you eat and what you put in your body. It's not just we can just transfer things and it's just a certain amount of calories and that equates to being a certain weight. A lot of these things are hormonally driven. Weight gain, weight loss can be hormonally driven. There are different carbohydrates that will affect your hormones, different amino acids that will affect your hormones, but carbohydrates in general will raise your blood sugar and that will raise your insulin. Insulin is the fat storage hormone. So is the fat storage hormone. It does other things too, but it does store fat. And so type 1 diabetics who don't have any insulin, they waste away. They cannot put on fat. They waste away until they die. And if they don't get insulin, then you get people on the other side of the spectrum who have insulinoma, an insulin secreting tumor, and they get extraordinarily obese very, very quickly. So we're all on that spectrum somewhere. And so the different sorts of foods that you eat can affect those hormones, and those hormones can affect other hormones. As a friend of mine, Dr. Gary Fettke, said, the body wants 4 grams of sugar in its body at any time. And after 4 grams of blood sugar, glucose, that's a toxic dose. So as little as 1 gram extra of glucose in your body is a toxic dose, and your body responds to it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it, by raising your insulin to get that below 4 grams. And if it stays above 4 grams, if someone has diabetes after decades of doing this to themselves, that is when their body starts to get damaged because of the glycation ability of those glucose molecules, fructose molecules, and other carbohydrates. They physically fuse to other molecules and permanently damage them. And so, and you get AGEs, advanced glycation end products, and you destroy your body from the inside out. And this is when people start to break down. The diabetics start getting their feet amputated, their legs amputated, their kidneys start to fail, your heart starts to fail, they die. So, it's not just enough to just limit what you're eating and eat, certain things. You have to eat the right thing. Different things will affect your body in different ways. It'll affect your body hormonally. And I think a testament to eating a biologically appropriate diet is if you can eat naturally and intuitively, and you eat as much as you want to eat, and then something inside of you says, hey, that's enough. and you stop. I joke around and say that, you never see a koala with a calculator figuring out its macros, right?
Right.
Because they don't need to. They if they're eating what they're designed to eat, they know when to stop. I you're saying that you take it as a compliment when people say like, oh, you must be on TRT. I always found the same thing. When I was competing, I never took steroids or anything like that. But I played extremely aggressively, extremely passionately. And so there'd be times where I'd just be going through and just causing a ruckus, make some, big hit or big play in, a very aggressive manner. And I remember one time when I was playing at University of Washington, just absolutely nailed this kid. And people were on the other team was like, Jesus, calm down, you're a roid freak, like that. And I just started laughing because, I didn't do that stuff. And so I definitely took that as a compliment. And so, when you're able to eat right, when you're able to, do the right things for your body responds in such amazing ways. And you can stay fit, you can stay lean, and you can, affect your health long term with pretty minimal effort on top of that. And then any exercise you're doing, the cardio, the rowing, and the weights, you get so much more benefit out of it. You can work harder, you can work longer, and you get more benefits out of it, and you get better recovery. So in every facet of your life and your health, this makes a big difference in what you eat.
But by the way, I want to make a distinction, folks. Dr. Chaffee and both myself, we both played sports at a high level, D1 sports, and at that level, there is a version, just genetics play in, right? Certain people will not get there just by eating meat or doing whatever we did. There is a genetic component to it, but everyone can be the best person they can be. Yeah. And get similar results. And I just want to make that clear because people will sit out there and go, oh, wait a minute. Well, these guys just eat a ton of beef and they play D1 ball. Listen, if your kid is 5'5" and they're probably not going to make it to D1 ball. They don't have enough, I don't know, B2 muscle fiber, fast twitch muscle fiber to get them there. It's just not going to happen. So there is that component to it. I just like to make that clear. Because parents call me all the time and say, I want my kid to get a scholarship. It's like, well, tell me about your kid. And I'm like, are they good at the spelling bee? Maybe the spelling bee is the way they can get to college.
Have you considered math or
band? There is something called the Math Olympics, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They didn't let me get anywhere near that group because I can't do math. But yeah, it's that component. Just 20 minutes ago, I was on Twitter, and I don't fight on Twitter. I put out facts, and if someone wants to question it, I will go through it with them. And this guy was being an asshole, for lack of any other term. And he goes, oh, yeah, I challenge anybody. I'm giving you his exact quote. I challenge anyone to get fat eating bananas, because I was saying, hey, bananas will make you gain weight if you eat enough bananas. And I said, well, yeah, they will. And he goes, well, go ahead, prove it. It's like, wait a minute. You want me to get fat to prove something to you on the internet? Mm-hmm. Why would I put my health in jeopardy by eating bananas? And then he wrote something back, and I said, listen, let's end this right now. The average banana, not the biggest, not the smallest, but the average banana comes in at between 28 and 30 grams of carbohydrates per banana. Okay. I looked up a Snickers bar really fast. It was equivalent to the normal size Snickers bar. Mm-hmm. I mean, you get this from a banana or a Snickers bar. Trust me, if I ate 5 bananas a day, that's 150 grams of carbs before I've touched any other carb. And I agree with you. We all need between a tablespoon, a teaspoon and maybe 2 teaspoons of sugar running through our bodies at all time to maintain homeostasis. This is 150 grams of sugar right out of the box. Mm-hmm. Enough said. But you see, you can't convince those people. They'll go right back. Yeah, but it's a banana. It's healthy carbs. What say you?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You will get people saying that. There's, we spoke about this sort of previously. I sort of mentioned it, but it was a great paper that just came out by Dr. Nick Norwitz, who's a PhD in biochemistry from Oxford and now is in his third year at medical school at Harvard. And, he's been doing ketogenic diets for a while. He had a lot of health issues. He started doing ketogenic diets, mostly meat-based. And he found massive health improvements. And that's the thing, as a doctor, as a patient, you see someone come in and they're doing something that goes against the norms and the standards, but they're getting all the improvements and benefits that you were told that they wouldn't get. And they're losing weight, they're gaining health, they're reversing autoimmune issues, they're reversing diabetes, they're getting all these sorts of benefits. All their objective markers and blood tests are all improving, but then their LDL goes up and goes, stop it immediately. My goodness, just shut this down. So he thought that was a bit odd, and to say the least. And so they've been doing work with, he's been doing work with, Dave Feldman, who's is an engineer, and just sort of saw this phenomenon and wanted to study it. But what I've sort of told people is this is a simple metabolic state change. Why does LDL go up when you go into a ketogenic diet? Well, why does it go up when you fast? Why, if you just stop eating for 5 days, your LDL will spike up.
Right.
And why is that? Well, that's because you are now running on your fat, and you have to mobilize your fat around your body. And LDL is a carrier molecule that moves fat throughout the body, because fat and water repel each other. So fat just can't travel through the body. It has to be contained in something, and that's our cholesterol molecules. So that's pretty much it. It's pretty much straightforward. You're in a metabolic state change, and now you're running on fat. So they subscribe to that sort of way of thinking. And one of the ways of demonstrating that was he said, well, if that's the case, if when you're eating carbs, your liver doesn't need to make blood sugar and glycogen, and so you don't need to transport as much fat to the liver. Makes sense. If you just fast, or you go into a ketogenic diet, well, now your liver has to make blood sugar, it has to make carbohydrates and glycogen. And so obviously you need to transport fat to the liver in order to do that. And so what that means is, if you start eating carbohydrates, well, that should suppress your LDL. And so if you eat that for a number of days or a number of weeks, that should bring your LDL right down, if that is indeed the mechanism that's going on. That's what you would expect to see. And so he was thinking about doing carb. Well, what should I do? Well, should I use bananas? Well, you're going to get that jabroni online saying that, like, no, but bananas are good for you, so they're going to improve your life and health in other ways. And what about muffins? And what about this? And what about that? So he just went straight for the goal, and he just went Oreo cookies. So He said, okay, I'm going to eat 12 Oreo cookies a day, every day. And his cholesterol was up around 400. So it was quite high. Well, for their standards, I don't think that's high at all. And so it was up to around 400. He ate Oreo cookies for 2 weeks, and it went down from 400 down to like 111. So it was like a 78% drop. And the cardiologist and doctor he was working with was like, "Ooh, you should probably check this the next couple of days, just so people don't think that this is like a lab error." And so he checked it the next 2 days, and it kept coming down the next 2 days. So day 14, 15, 16 kept coming down. And then he contrasted that. He did a washout period. He let his cholesterol come back up over 400. And he then tested that against high-dose statins. So he went on high-dose statin therapy for 6 weeks, and he tracked his LDL cholesterol. At the nadir of his LDL, it only dropped by I think something like 36%. So it
Wow.
far less. And that was only after 4
less
weeks.
than half. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, less than half than what the Oreo cookies did. And it took 4 weeks to do it instead of 2 weeks to do it. And then it actually started coming back up. At week 6, it had actually come up. And so he picked Oreo cookies because there's no one in their right mind. I mean, I would maybe your friend on Twitter would try to argue that Oreo cookies are actually good for your heart, but no one in their right mind is going to argue that Oreo cookies are good for you. And yet it lowers your LDL cholesterol, and that's supposed to be the end. It doesn't matter what lowers your cholesterol. If it lowers your LDL cholesterol, then it is good for you, which of course is wrong-headed. And so this just shows that this is a metabolic state change. So, eating those carbohydrates, of course, is going to affect you. Eating a banana has 30 grams of carbohydrates, of course, it's going to affect you. It affects you hormonally. It raises your insulin. Insulin completely rearranges your entire metabolic system. We are in a specific metabolic structure. And then when insulin goes up, it completely rearranges your entire metabolism. It is so important to your body to keep your blood sugar below 4 grams, that it is willing to completely rearrange your entire physiology and biochemistry and metabolism. It is willing to push your brain and your heart onto its secondary energy source, which is glucose. But because everybody's been eating carbohydrates for the last century since we've been able to study this, everyone thinks that, oh, that's a primary metabolic state, is one of glucose metabolism and insulin and your brain running on glucose, your heart running on glucose. That's not actually correct. Your brain and your heart prefer ketones. If you have any ketones in your body, your brain is always running on those ketones. It's just filling in the gaps with the glucose. How do I know this? Because when you are in a position to have enough ketones, you take exogenous ketones, or you're in a ketogenic state, your ketones are high, but your blood sugar is also high, or at least normal. And so you have a sufficient supply of glucose, and now you have a sufficient supply of ketones. Your brain does not run on any glucose at all. It only runs on ketones for about 2/3 of your brain. There's certain brain cells that still run on glucose. But for 2/3 of your brain, if there are ketones available, it will only run on ketones in exclusion of the available glucose. Same goes for your cardiac myocytes. So that's a preference. And so it's so important to get your blood sugar down that your body will allow your brain to go on a secondary energy source, your heart to go on a secondary energy source, your intestines to go on a secondary energy source. This is why, Greger and Ornish and things like that tell you to eat fiber, because, you make short chain fatty acids, and that's very good for your enterocytes. Well, that's what butyrate is. Hydroxybutyrate is a major ketone body that you make when you're in ketosis. So that's its primary energy source. And yet you're running on a secondary energy source, and you're running in this completely altered metabolic state. That's how important it is to your body to keep your blood sugar below 4. And so, a banana, 1 banana or 10 bananas, it's going to affect you negatively. And yeah, of course, when you eat 5 bananas, 6 bananas, 7 bananas, you're eating a lot of carbohydrates. That's going to cause you to secrete a lot of insulin. You're going to be depositing fat. That's all there is to it.
One of the big questions, I do these consults 5 days a week. Been doing them for 8 or 10 years. People can call, sign up, and I'll talk to them. I would have to say somewhere around 50% of those consults, maybe even a little more, it always starts the same way. Vin, I'm a big fan. I believe in you. I used to weigh this. I'm 150 pounds lighter. Fill in the blanks, right? Okay, great, thanks. But I know that when they start telling me that, I know there's a but coming. But I went to see my doctor to get my yearly checkup, and I said, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
And my doctor blew a fuse. He wanted me on a statin yesterday. The guy was beside himself. It's like, well, did your doctor see that you were 150 pounds down? Yeah. Did he see that your triglycerides went from like 240 or 350 to, below 100? Yeah. He made a comment about that. Did he see that all of your other markers were perfect? Yep. And what's your total cholesterol? And I always tell him, look, I can't give advice. I'm not a doctor, but what was your total cholesterol? It was 204. Total cholesterol. Oh, what was your LDLs? Well, that was this. And what was your HDL? It was that, perfect ratio. And it's like, okay, look, I'm not a doctor, but your triglyceride to HDL to LDL ratio, according to what I've heard from heart surgeons, is perfect. Now, don't take my word for it, because you might have your lipo A, your ApoA, your ApoB might be screwed up. You might have small dense particles. I don't know. But guess who else doesn't know? The guy who wants to put you on statin, because he didn't check that. He just checked, the overall cholesterol. He didn't even get into the particles, right? Would you agree with that? I mean, I tell this to people, and I say, look, I'm just giving you information. Now go find a doctor that understands the particle test and the ratio of triglycerides to HDL and LDL. And when you say that to him, they go, oh, my doctor didn't tell me any of that. It's like, yeah, but he wanted to put, that's like you walking into a doctor and the doctor says, Anthony, I think I'm going to cast your right arm. It's like, yeah, but my right arm is not broken. Yeah, we're going to put a cast on it because it might break at some point. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Right? Am I wrong about this?
No, The thing is that a lot of doctors look, a lot of our education in medical schools comes actually directly or indirectly from the pharmaceutical companies, and we don't realize that. But a lot of the curriculum is driven by that. And then when we get into residency, we get into practice, a lot of our continuing education is again directed by the pharmaceutical companies, sometimes just pointedly. A lot of times doctors continuing education comes on a Tuesday afternoon, and then when they get a catered lunch from the pharmaceutical rep and they come in and say, hey, this is our product, this is our thing, these are the studies, this is how great it is. And they treat them as if this is the research wing of the hospital that's just trying to, oh, here's the new studies and here's the new research, as opposed to someone, selling something. That's fine. You want to sell something. But we as doctors need to understand that this is a sales pitch. This isn't necessarily the end of the discussion. And so we shouldn't treat that as the our education. We need to educate ourselves. We need to look at the studies ourselves. We need to look at their studies. We need to look at opposing studies to make an informed sort of choice, inform ourselves so that we can make better recommendations to our patients. It is so common that people just say, well, your LDL is slightly up, you should be on a statin, or you have a family history, you should be on a statin, or preventatively, even though your LDL isn't high, you should be on a statin. That's insanity to me. I think that gets into the realm of, let's put a cast on your arm because your dad broke his arm and you might break your arm too. It really doesn't make sense. And that's if statins have been shown to actually reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke and things like that, which I don't think that's a very good that's been established at all. The idea is that it reduces LDL, and that LDL is an absolute risk of heart disease and atherosclerotic plaque buildup. It is not. And so there's like we saw with Dr. Norwitz, that your LDL can go up and down for different sorts of reasons, for metabolic reasons. He worked with Dave Feldman with the lean mass hyperresponders. This is a sort of a name that they gave to people who were slender on ketogenic carnivore diets or fasting. Then their LDL goes up in response. And in fact, they found that the slimmer you are, the lower body fat percentage you are, really went by BMI, that the more dramatic your rise in LDL was. And something that Dr. Sean Baker pointed out the other day was that it was this graph. So it was like the leaner you are, the higher your LDL was, and it sort of went down the higher your BMI went. And said, what other condition, do you see getting worse the leaner, stronger, and fitter and healthier you are? That doesn't make any sense. These are healthier people in a healthier position. All their other biomarkers are improved. Then they have low weight, low BMI, and yet, LDL is up. That must mean that must mean it's bad. Well, maybe actually means the opposite. Maybe that's actually a good thing. Maybe that's a positive biomarker. LDL and cholesterol in general were vilified by the sugar companies, called the Sugar Research Foundation. This was used as a scapegoat because there was studies coming out in the 50s saying that sugar had a very strong association with the increase in heart disease. And so they said, okay, well, we need to get counter studies out there. And so they started paying off professors at Harvard and elsewhere, Ansel Keys famously. And this is not a matter of conjecture. This is not up for debate. This is a fact. We have their own records. We have their own documentation saying that they did this. And that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016. People can look it up. And one of those professors from Harvard was named head of the USDA. He was the one who authored and published the USDA declaration saying that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, stop eating both. So this was a fraud. And since we started eating less meat, or less red meat in particular, sort of overall meat stayed about the same, but we replaced it with like chicken breasts usually. But red meat came down by over a third. Fat and cholesterol came down by over a third. Fruits and vegetables went up by 30-40% respectively. Grains went way up. And said that safe, healthy, good polyunsaturated fats went up by over threefold. And so did high fructose corn syrup, actually replaced out sugar. So, sugar was still going up. They just sort of replaced it with high fructose corn syrup. And what happened? The heart disease rates tripled. Yeah. Right. So we're going on medications. We're doing these dietary interventions and lifestyle interventions to lower your cholesterol, lower your LDL, and yet heart disease rates are going up. Now, some dishonest actors will try to, use a straw man or a red herring to sort of shift the argument and say, well, actually, cardiac mortality has peaked in the 60s and 70s and then started coming down around this time. That's not what we said. We said the rate, the prevalence, the incidence of heart disease is going up, and it is. People having their first heart attack but surviving is going up. The percentage of the population who have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease is higher decade after decade. The incidence, the amount of people getting new diagnoses of heart disease and having first-time heart attacks each year is going up. So, and worldwide, and that's just in America. For as far as the death rates are concerned, death rates around the world is going up, and so it's going up all over the world, and is going up it's growing faster than the rate of population expansion. So this is disproportionate with the growth of population, and so you can't say that cholesterol causes heart disease and that statins and doing all these sorts of measures to lower your cholesterol reverses atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease if you do all those interventions, reduce cholesterol, and then the rates of heart disease go up. If anything, you could say it's protective. And in fact, a lot of studies show that it is. Even the Framingham study, which was one of the most famous studies in cardiology, that was reported by the American Heart Association as saying, well, more cholesterol, more heart attacks and strokes. That's what I was taught in medical school. Well, it turns out, and this is in the published literature, that was actually misrepresented. And the original data set that the Framingham study discovered and compiled found that actually if your total cholesterol came down, heart attacks and strokes deaths went up, right? And so there are a number of other factors as well, and just publication after publication after publication showing meta-analyses and randomized controlled trials showing that there is no association at all between saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease. In fact, they find an inverse relationship between saturated fat intake and stroke. That was published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology in 2020. Massive literature review looking at randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses, all the top levels of evidence. And they found that the more saturated fat people ate, the lower their risk of stroke. The less saturated fat they ate, the higher their risk of stroke. And then they say, okay, well, what about LDL? Well, what kind of LDL? There's over 100 different kinds of LDL. You can't just say LDL. Just like you previously they just said cholesterol. And there's good cholesterol, there's bad cholesterol, there's just, well, there's good LDL and there's bad LDL. So which ones do you have? And if you haven't looked at that and looked at the particulate studies and done a LDL subfraction study, you don't know what you're working with. Now, if you have high HDL or in the good range of HDL and in the good range of triglycerides, so high HDL, low triglycerides, you are statistically much more likely to have good LDL. It's not damaged. It's not, I think it's the smoke, not the fire. Even if you have damaged SD-LDL, is that causing atherosclerosis, or is that being caused by the thing that's causing atherosclerosis? Is that being damaged by the same process that's damaging your arteries and causing atherosclerosis? I would bet it's that. You mentioned like LP(a). That's thought to be a genetic risk factor for heart disease, and it's just sort of immutable. It won't change. And yet there are studies showing that if you increase the saturated fat intake, you can actually lower your LP(a). So if that's elevated, that's thought to be you're predisposed to having that. But there are other genetic risk factors as well. And the Inuit in northern Canada and elsewhere, they traditionally throughout the 20th century had very low rates of heart disease. In the early 20th century, they had basically no heart disease unless they were living in the city and they were eating Western food. They got Western diseases, very simple. And as the 20th century progressed, their rates of heart disease started creeping up. Their cancer rates started creeping up. It was nearly non-existent. Wilhelm Stefansson was a professor at Harvard. He's an ethnologist. He lived with the Inuit, wrote a book called The Fat of the Land, lived with them for 12 years, discovered, large areas of northern Canada and mapped it out. And he thought, hey, look, we should just be eating meat. This is much more healthy. He wrote a book about it, but he wrote other books. And one of them was, is cancer a disease of civilization? Because he's like, these people living outside of civilization, just living naturally, they just don't get cancer. Animals don't get cancer. This is a unique thing to people living in current Western societies. Then sort of decade by decade, the Inuit cancer rates slowly started creeping up, but still very, very low. And you get to the 1990s. There was a study published in 1996 or 97. And they found, and they were looking at the Inuit and their coronary artery disease and cardiovascular disease, I should say. And they said, look, they have really low rates, even though this was the height of the cholesterol causes heart disease sort of era.
Right.
And they said they have these huge risk factors. They're just eating blubber. And they were looking at the total population as the ethnic population. They weren't even looking at it as just the people just eating meat. So if they were just looking at people just eating meat, when you look at those studies, there's vanishingly small rates of chronic disease. And so they were looking at the entire ethnic population, and the entire ethnic population at that time was still a lot lower than the rest of Canada. And they thought, okay, well, maybe there's genetic factors because they have all these risks. They start smoking at a very young age, and they are just eating blubber. And so they're high risk factors, right? And so I said, well, they must have genetic protections. That's what people say. I'm like, well, what about the Inuit? Oh, well, they're specially adapted to that. Well, no, they're not actually. That's all our ancestors going back 2 million years have lived through ice ages, exactly the same conditions they lived in. So actually, we're the aberration. We're what's new. We're the new adaptation because we had agriculture. Our ancestors had agriculture. We are the adaptation. The Inuits are living the way that we've always lived. And so they're just doing what they're supposed to do. We have the adaptations. So they looked at this and said, well, maybe they have just all the genetic protections against this. Maybe they don't have any of these genetic risk factors. Maybe they have these protective genes. And they checked them and they found, no, they have all the bad ones. They have all these genetic risk factors and genetic predispositions to getting heart disease. And yet their heart disease rates are much lower. And so they said, okay, well, we don't know what the hell is going on. Maybe there's something else that's affecting this and lowering their risk, or maybe these genetic risk factors aren't what we thought they were. And then you look in the 2000s and the 2010s, and they say, well, people say that Inuit have low heart disease rate, but is that true? And they start looking at, again, the ethnic population of the Inuit, now even more incorporated into Western society, eating crap and processed food and alcohol and all these sorts of things. And wouldn't you know, their heart disease rates are higher now. Like, well, right, that proves the point that if they eat just meat, they're just traditional diet, they don't get it. It's the food that's causing it. They start eating more Western food, they start getting more Western diseases. So, it's high time we really got rid of the whole concept of LDL and cholesterol being causative for heart disease. I mean, simply put, 50% of the heart attacks in America occur in people with low LDL.
Yeah.
Lower normal LDL. And then
I thought it was high. I thought it was higher than that. So is it? I've heard that like 60%, but
potentially. I mean, the study I'm referring to is probably about 7-8 years old now. So potentially that's that's the case, that it's changed since then. But there were two studies sort of around the 2015-16 mark where they looked at about 140,000, or that had around 160,000 patients, and it was just dead even. It was just like 50% split. And one of them followed people for 3 years. And obviously all their doctors were saying, you have to get your LDL down. You have to get your cholesterol down. Even like the low cholesterol people, they said, if you keep having heart attacks, this is a recommendation probably directly from the drug companies saying that if you have heart attacks and your LDL is low, well, you should lower it more. And if you have a heart attack again, you should lower it more. And there's no lower limit. If you keep having heart attacks, you just keep lowering your heart attack.
And it makes zero sense. We're going to take a quick break here.
Mm-hmm.
The two questions I have for you right after I do this ad, so I'll let you think about it for a second. Well, the first one you don't have to think about. I want to talk about what 4 grams of sugar actually looks like in your blood, to let people know just how little sugar you need. But there's a bigger question that the vegans are now throwing out there. I always say whenever you beat the vegans at their own argument, they move to something else.
Yeah.
Like a few years ago when they figured out, wait, these carnivore people and these low carb guys, they're actually losing weight and getting healthier. So now we're going to start blaming cow farts on the ozone layer, right? That was their thing a couple of years ago. Well, we're debunking that left, right, and center. And now they're finding a new thing. They're going, well, wait, if you eat a lot of protein, mTOR skyrockets. So I want to get into the mTOR conversation with you, if you will. But before we do that, folks, I'm sorry, my voice is a little croaky today. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's all the filterless cigarettes I smoke around here. Villa Capelli Olive Oil is the longest running sponsor of this show for good reason. I don't think I don't think Dr. Chaffee would say one bad thing about olive oil because even though it comes from a fruit, it's the elixir of health, in my opinion. Villicapelli is 100% pure olive oil. 100%. Why do I say that? Well, in this country, you can cut olive oil up to 40% and still call it 100% pure, unadulterated, organic. You put any label you want on it, as long as it's only 60% olive oil. What's that other 40%? Seed oils, the crap that will screw you up. Get Villicapelli. It's not expensive. You get 3-liter 10 for under $100. I tell people, spend about $145, and then you'll get a Vinnie discount. You put in promo code Vinnie, you get a 10% discount, and your bill is still above $125. You get free shipping. So that's 2 ways to save at Villicapelli. Buy a lot of olive oil. It lasts forever. Just keep it in a cool, dry place. Comes in a nice tin can. And then, man, $125. Listen, if you bought real olive oil in this country, you would buy 325 milliliters, and it would probably cost you $50. I'm not making that up. This is 3 liters. Okay, this is a hell of a lot more olive oil. Go get it. Let them know we sent you. Vinnie, Vinnie, no wimpy Y, and you'll get 10% off. If you spend more than $125 after the discount, what? Oh, wait a minute. What did you just say? That's right, free shipping. And when you're shipping damn near a gallon of olive oil, it can be expensive. So make sure you get that savings. We're talking to Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I love having this guy on. By the way, thank you. Nick Norwitz and I, thank you for reminding me. We were having phone conversations this summer, and he wanted to finish up some of this experiment stuff before we got on. So I need to call Nick right after this, and thank you for reminding me, because I just had Dave back on the show last week talking about his study. I mean, the findings there were just amazing. So we've had Dave on. Now we have you on. That's Dave Feldman, folks, and we're going to get Nick Norwitz on in short order. Thanks for reminding me. Just pretend I'm in kindergarten for a second, Anthony. And 4 grams, I always tell people, look, they'll go, well, after a workout, I need to get my carbs back in. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Eat a piece of cheese. Eat some dairy. You'll get enough carbs. Eat a broccoli. Eat a piece of broccoli. Anything will get you back. Anything you think you've lost in that workout. Hell, like I was bragging about going 2 hours on my rowing machine yesterday, right? I didn't get up and go hammer sugar in any shape or form, right? As a matter of fact, when I went upstairs, I make a product called UltraFat. I squirted an UltraFat in my mouth, and I drank some water, and I sat down and did 2 podcasts, right? I didn't feel low blood sugar. I didn't have any problem. I did 2 back-to-back podcasts. You think I'm kidding? It was Gina and I did 2. And then right after that, I did the Meat Mafia podcast. I did their show. Didn't have to eat. I didn't lose any energy. I didn't feel faint. Just went on about my day. And then last night had about a pound of hamburger meat, and here we are. I still haven't eaten yet today. Normally I eat breakfast, but I had so many things to do before this podcast that I haven't even eaten yet today. So talk to me about sugar and 4 grams and what that actually means.
Well, so a level teaspoon is 4 grams of sugar, right? So it's not much. Your body really doesn't need much. And you're people that say that, well, you have to have carbs in order to exercise and push yourself. That's actually not true. Your muscles actually run just fine on ketones. In fact, there are glycogen storage diseases like Pompei's disease, where you can't utilize glycogen. Your muscles actually don't run on glycogen at all, really. And so they get horribly tired and just gassed. They walk down the street, they walk 50 feet, and they have to stop like they've just been doing sprints. And their entire body is just shook, and they have to wait and recover. It takes them a little while. And there are case reports in the literature, now a case series by Professor Eric Westman from Duke University, where he found that people that go on ketogenic diets, with Pompei's disease, I believe it's Pompei's disease, but anyway, it's a similar glycogen storage disease. If it's not that, but I'm pretty sure it is. They ended up having a complete resolution of their symptoms. So they didn't get tired, they didn't get gas, their body was running on ketones. and their muscles could run on ketones. So you absolutely run on ketones. Your muscles can absolutely run on ketones. Your heart and your brain primarily run on ketones. So do your intestines. So that you don't need much, and your body does replenish this. It makes it itself. Again, from your fat, you mobilize your fat, you move it to your liver, and then they turn that into blood sugar and glycogen in your liver, and store that in your muscles as well. So there have been studies. There's a professor, Tim Noakes, who's very interesting story, because he was a big proponent of carbohydrate training, and athletes needed carbohydrates, and he wrote books on this and was the world's expert and sports medicine doctor and exercise physiology sort of experts in the world. For decades, he was saying, hey, you really need carbs to be a top performing athlete. Then about a decade ago, he went, holy crap, I got that wrong. I got that very wrong. And the man's could have just retired in fame and accolades.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he just said, no, that was wrong. I got that wrong. I need to undo this. And so he's been spending his retirement running experiments and running trials and trying to undo his own work, which it just takes the magnitude of integrity that takes is remarkable. And so he does studies with any sort of, everyone says it's like, well, it's like, sure, you do sprinting, but you're not going to do long distance things without carbs. And then the person who says, okay, well, this guy there's a guy who actually I'll be interviewing, is very interesting. He's an Australian dude. He ran 5 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted the whole time.
Yeah.
Did not eat the entire time, right? So it's just show, hey, your body makes energy. It has energy. You're going to be fine. And, so they say, okay, well, that guy does that. He runs 5 marathons in 5 days without eating anything, carbs or otherwise. And yeah, but you're not going to do like the power, you're not going to do the explosive sort of sprinting stuff. Whatever example that you have of someone doing, some sort of amazing athletic feat, it's always, oh, well, there's another kind of athleticism that doesn't work well, on a state of ketosis. First of all, if you need carbohydrates to do any of these things, that's fine, because you make carbohydrates, you make glycogen, you make blood sugar. So, I mean, it's sort of a moot point. It's sort of a strange argument. Oh, you have to eat carbohydrates because it's a special kind of carbohydrates. It's not the kinds that you make, just the kind that you eat or something like that.
Yeah.
And the same damn blood sugar level.
Yeah.
Like what exactly is the holdup here? Biochemically, it takes about 10 steps chemically to change glucose into glycogen. Whereas ketones, it actually is a much shorter conversion into glycogen. People don't know that, but it's actually easier for your body to make glycogen out of ketones biochemically. And so Noakes has been doing great work, because he's been showing in sprinters, in long distance, in different sorts of athletic endeavors, that people that are keto adapted, fat adapted, they have exactly the same amount of athletic and energetic output. They have no lag. And then you do crossover studies. So the ketogenic athletes compared to the carbohydrate athletes, and then they switch and they find there's absolutely no drop off. But the benefit of being in ketosis is that you now you're tapped into your fat stores, and you don't run out of energy. You don't have to like keep sucking down, Gatorades and things like that. You just go, and your body just keeps running. So then people ask, okay, well, can you replenish your blood sugar and your glycogen as fast as sucking down sugar water? And I was speaking to a friend of mine who's also an exercise sports medicine doctor in Sydney. His name is Dr. Paul Mason. Very interesting guy. Has a lot of really
love Paul. Yeah, he's another one I got to get back on the show. I love Paul.
Yeah, no, he's great. And so he was telling me about a study that they recently did, not him personally, but that he saw. That they tested exactly that. They said, okay, who replenishes their glycogen faster? And they found that the ketogenic athletes, the fat adapted athletes, actually replenish their glycogen faster than the carb fueled athletes who were sucking down sugar water. So
say that again, because yeah. I don't want that to fly over the audience, because that's very important. Say that again.
Yeah. So people on a ketogenic diet, so athletes on a ketogenic diet that are not eating any carbohydrates, just, fat and protein, right. Their body through gluconeogenesis is able to replenish their blood sugar and their glycogen in their muscles and liver faster than carb fueled athletes that are eating carbohydrates, drinking sugar water. they can do that faster than the carb athletes who are drinking down sugar water.
Okay, let me push back, and I want you to answer this because Tim is a good friend. Tim has probably been on this show more than any other doctor, and which is amazing for me because from exercise, my degree in exercise physiology, we looked at Tim Noakes back in the day as the god and the hero. And then here I am 10 years ago, this guy's coming on my show on a regular basis. And just recently, folks, go back a couple of months. I had Tim on. He did a study and he was able to get well-trained athletes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, up to 87% of their aerobic capacity. I was under the impression, and so was Tim, that we would never get anyone past 80% of their aerobic capacity to operate on just ketones. And he went to 87%. That's hitting on the ground floor of zone 4, right? And now I'm hearing you say that we can take athletes that are not taking in glucose or sugar of any sort, and we're converting faster. Now, the wisdom has always been the reason we have to get sugar at some point is because we can't match it with butyrates because it takes too long to change a fat into basically water, but because that's what we do, right? That, we turn to a butyrate and use it as energy. Explain how we're doing that and why it works.
As far as why we're converting,
how we can convert it as fast as sugar, because the conventional wisdom, when I was going through Tulane, now I'm a relic. I was 45 years ago, but it was, well, at some point, even though fat is our preferred fuel, when you're an athlete, you need this sugar because you cannot turn fat into a butyrate. You can't turn it into an energy source fast enough. But now we're learning that we can, because Tim Noakes got someone right under the 4, in zone 4. And I'm sure Tim's going to keep looking at it until he actually figures out how to get someone past 90%. And then it's like the gloves are off. The gloves are off already, right? So what say you?
Yeah, so I bounced that off of actually a doctor or Professor Laszlo Boros, who's a professor of medicine at UCLA, emeritus now, and he ran a biochemistry lab and molecular biology lab. So he teaches this stuff at UCLA, and or taught it anyway. He's since moved on, but I sort of bounced that off him, and he was the one who actually told me that it takes about 10 chemical steps to turn glucose into glycogen. You wouldn't think that. You wouldn't expect that, because glycogen is just strings of glucose. So you think, oh, that'd be very simple. He's like, no, actually, it's actually a more complex reaction. There are more intermediary steps between glucose and glycogen. So he said that makes perfect sense from a molecular biology point of view, from a biochemical point of view, because when you're actually running on ketones, you actually do make glycogen more quickly. So it's interesting. I don't know all the exact mechanisms, so that's sort of coming secondhand, but that it didn't phase him at all as a professor of biochemistry, molecular biology, and medicine at UCLA. He's like, oh yeah, no, that makes perfect sense that would do that, and that is what we're seeing clinically now, at least in these trials that Dr. Paul Mason spoke about. He told me about this maybe last month when I was speaking to him, and he said that he actually passed that on to Professor Noakes recently as well. And so that's probably going to make some waves also, and probably open up new lines of research to really pound that out and see exactly what's going on. But I think of it just functionally. Think of it this way: we've all been, everyone who's been a sort of an athlete, a high performance athlete, or just really just exercise a lot and push themselves, they always know that they run into this concept of hitting the wall. They push themselves, they run, they're doing something, and then they hit the wall. Invariably, they run out of energy. So you got a carbo load, you got to add in all this sugar and pasta the night before, so that you extend that period out from when you hit the wall. But you're going to hit the wall, and eventually you hit the wall. But what people that run marathons or do triathlons or Ironmans or something like that, what they tell you is like, yes, you hit the wall, and most people, you run out of energy, you run out of glycogen, your blood sugar is low, you can't produce ketones, you feel like rubbish, and most people stop there. They can't keep going. But if you push and you push and you push and you push, eventually you'll break through the wall. You'll get to the other side and you get your second wind. And now you have your runner's high, and you can just go forever. And it's just the harder you go, the better you feel. Well, what that is biochemically is you're switching from that state where your insulin is high and you're in that metabolic state where insulin is high and it suppresses your body's mobilization of fat from your storage and from making ketones. It stops you from making ketones and making blood sugar, making glycogen. So eventually you run out. And then you push through and you force your body into start making this again. You start making blood sugar and glycogen and mobilizing your ketones. And then you can just keep going because now you're running on your fat stores. But if you're on a ketogenic diet, you are always in your second wind. You are always in that runner's high. You're always in that metabolic state where you can just perpetually replenish your glycogen and blood sugar and ketones. And remember that even if your glycogen were low or you couldn't access it, like in Pompei's disease, your muscles still run on ketones. And so you actually can exert yourself extremely well athletically. And this is something that you've noticed as an athlete, something that I've noticed as an athlete. It's night and day. I played 5 years of professional rugby as a just meat and water only. I played 5 years just eating a sort of a more whole food meat-based diet, but with some carbs and with some other and veggies and things like that. And it is night and day difference between my energy levels and how I felt. And I naturally would have gravitated to never eating on the day of competition. I was always in a fasted state. I would always tell people, always play hungry, because I sort of thought of it like as hunters, your body's telling you like, hey, get out, go out, kill something, fight, and you have that sort of primal instinct to go out and hunt. And if you eat something, then you're telling your body, yeah, we're good. Let's just sit on this. And so I would tell people to play hungry. That's how I thought about it. But physiologically, biochemically, it made a lot of sense too, because even when I was eating carbohydrates, I would never carb load. I always felt better when I didn't carb load. In fact, I would often feel better if I skipped dinner and then didn't eat the next day and was 24-hour fasted or more.
Right.
It just naturally felt better to me. And so, we can get, all studies can do for you is guide you. They say, well, this is this information. And there's always going to be, you can get a study that says anything. It concludes anything. And so what you do is you say, okay, well, on the body of evidence, I think I'm going to do this with my life. And that's really what matters. What happens in your life? If you say, okay, well, I'm going to go on a ketogenic route, I'm going to go a carb route, you just see, and so if you go on just a ketogenic diet, a meat only diet, and you find that your athletic performance improves and you're able to work harder and work longer and push yourself, it really doesn't matter what a study says. Oh, that's not going to happen. That can't happen. It just did. It just happened. It literally just happened. And so that's the important thing. You use studies to guide your decisions and help you make better choices in your life. But at the end of the day, the end of one is the most important. It's the only thing that matters in your life. And if you're doing a large study, yes, you need an N of 25,000. That would be best. But it doesn't matter if you have an N of 38 million, if that does not translate to your experiences.
Right.
So it doesn't matter. And that's the important thing.
Well, look, I'm a lot older than you, and I tell people all the time, I would go out. I was interested in, I go out to marathons and everything and watch people run back in the 70s. There was no such thing as a fuel belt or a camelback where people can literally put sugar on their back and just suck it in through a tube, or having a fuel belt. Folks, if you don't know, if you've never run a marathon or whatever, you go to a running store right next to where you buy your shoes. There's the wall of sugar where you can buy any kind of dextrose product, and they sell you a little, a stretchy belt you put around your waist like a holster, and you can holster up all of the sugar around your waist. And I've had people tell me, oh, Vin, you don't get it. I can't run a marathon without having my fuel belt. I can't even go out for a 10-mile run without my fuel belt or my camelback on. And I'm sitting there thinking, I used to watch marathons back in the 70s. Nobody had a fuel belt or a camelback. As a matter of fact, the runners, you would see them running and they would pass by a table and grab a thing of water. Most of it was slosh out, and they would just kind of throw it at their face. That was hydration for a marathon back in 1978. And bottom line, the other point I always make is, these kids, these parents say, "Oh, my kids need food." When I played football at a high level, right? We would eat a school lunch at noontime. Your stomach will empty the content of that food within 3 hours. So by 3 o'clock that afternoon, that food was emptied, right? It was emptied from your stomach. Now you got the calories from it, you got the blood sugar from it and everything else. You're stoked up still by 3 o'clock because all you did was you sat in class for the rest of the day. Now you go, by 3:30, we would be dressed out and on the football field between 3:30 and 6 o'clock that night. Nobody ate anything. The only vegetation, because I grew up in the deep South, the only vegetation any of us had was a little dip of Copenhagen or Skull on our way to the field. We had to walk about a quarter of a mile after we dressed out to our practice field, right? It wasn't right on campus. And most of the guys would have a little hit of Skull in their mouth. That was the equivalent of the vegetation or any kind of nutrition when we played football back in 1978, 79. In those days, no one had low blood sugar. No one had a mommy bringing orange slices or muffins to the field. It just didn't happen, right? And water breaks were non-existent back then. I played in southern Louisiana. You can't have water. You got to toughen up. That was the equipment. And no one died. No one died. No one had low blood sugar. Nothing. So it always makes me wonder when this happened, right? And by the way, we would all get home that night, and there would be some version of, steak, chicken. We're in Louisiana, duck, deer. I loved rabbit, but it was, you would have to kill 10 rabbits before you can have a real meal. But that was the deal, right? That was the deal. No one was overeating any of this stuff. But then we would have a big giant meal again at night, which makes me cringe at what we do today and call it athletics. And I'm so glad you brought up Paul Mason because I've been wanting to remember to get that guy back on my show for a while. I want to move on because I don't want to keep you forever, Anthony. But, I was supposed to have Michael Greger on the show about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he didn't, his people didn't realize he put a thing out because he had a book coming out. And so we went, yeah, we'll have him on. And they canceled in the 11th hour. So I actually prepped for this guy. And then at the last minute, he canceled. So, oh no, it's you. And I'm not coming on. Right. And, but I knew he was going to bring up, because whenever you talk to you get any vegan to have any conversation, their new thing is mTOR. Well, if you raise mTOR too much, you're going to kill you. You're going to be dead by next week. mTOR. And I'm sitting there going, again, I've been eating high protein, high fat forever. Why am I perfectly healthy? You eat high fat, high protein. You're perfectly. Sean Baker, we go through the same list. We just go through the same list of people. I still can't think of that other guy's name. Nathan. People are yelling it. The guy that does the pull-ups, he goes to failure.
No, I don't know. I don't come across that.
He's on the show all the time, and I can't think of his last name right now. You would know the guy if I. But all of these guys, we're all doing great. We all look great. Yet the vegans with the little pencil necks are telling us, mTOR is going to kill you by noon tomorrow. What say you?
Well, the thing is, mTOR is very little understood. It's obviously a very complex part of your biomechanics, and this is not something that we understand. I don't pretend to be an expert in it because no one's an expert in it. Anyone who tells you they are is really fooling themselves. This is something that we're trying to learn about, but so many of these things are, you're missing the forest for the trees. This is one process going on in an insanely complex system. We have trillions and trillions of cells. Some estimates of up to 10 trillion cells in our body, and each one of those has trillions of chemical interactions every second. So, I mean, the amount of complexity that is there is just staggering. You are never going to micromanage your biochemistry better than your biochemistry can. It's just insane that people would think that they could. The hubris involved in that you could do that is pretty astronomical. It comes down to this: if you are designed to eat something, and you eat that something, your mTOR is going to work the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be on here and off there and on here and off there in combination with all these other factors. It is very important that it goes on and off at the exact right times in the exact combination with all these other sorts of factors. And we will never be able to figure out the exact combination of that. Maybe we'll figure it out enough that we can manipulate in some way. We are nowhere close to that yet. If you are eating what you're supposed to eat, your mTOR is going to be on and off when it's supposed to be on or off. A lion doesn't give two shits about its mTOR, neither do dolphins or penguins. Like, it doesn't matter to them. And if you studied their mTOR, it would be going up and down at different times. That is physiologically appropriate for them. The idea that we are getting damaged by eating the food that we've eaten for over 2 million years. Humans have been apex predators for 2 million years at least. Apex predators are by definition carnivores. We've been eating meat for millions of years before we were apex predators. The idea that we are being damaged and that we don't have the correct mTOR physiology eating the food that we've been eating for millions of years is ludicrous. There's the immutable law of biology, is that of adaptation. You adapt to stress, or your species doesn't survive, you die. So we either change or you die. So we've been eating meat for millions and millions and millions and millions of years, right? We started eating meat around 6 to 8 million years ago, started getting more and more and more apex predators for at least 2 million years. So we are well adapted to everything going on in meat. And also, there's nothing in meat. I mean, 70% of animal species are carnivores. They only eat meat. There is nothing in meat that is inherently harmful for you, because there doesn't need to be, because these animals have kinetic defenses. They can run away, they can fight back, especially the large animals. Little insects or scorpions or toads that have poison, or a poison sac, or snakes with venom, sure, but they're smaller. They need to defend themselves. They need more weapons to defend themselves, but their meat is not poisonous. It's not toxic. It's not going to harm you. It's the most nutritious and bioavailable nutrient source that exists in the world. That is not true for plants. They don't have the bioavailability. They don't have the right nutrients, and they actually do have defense chemicals because they're stationary. They can't fight back and run away. Right. They're just sitting there. So they make them out of a million different defense chemicals. Meat doesn't need to do that because they have kinetic defenses. They have other defenses. And so the idea that meat causes harm, when it causes harm for no other animal that eats it, even strict herbivores that eat meat do very well. It's very bioavailable even to them. It's very difficult to turn plant material into animal tissue. It's an entirely different form of life. It's very easy to turn animal tissue into animal tissue. It's all the building blocks are right there. So the idea, again, that just eating meat, even if we were herbivores, would be harmful for us, it would be completely unique in nature, because that is not the case for any other animal. So, and you look at all the populations, the Inuit, going back to time immemorial, the Native Americans just eating bison. There was a study in 2001 that showed the Plains Indians in North America before the bison were wiped out, when they were just eating bison, they were the tallest human beings on Earth. So the average height of a population denotes the average health of a population. They are not the tallest human beings on Earth anymore, and they are 4 times they have 4 times the rate of chronic disease and illness that that people of European descent in America have. So that there's a clear disparity in the health immediately after they stopped eating meat. So the idea that eating meat was the problem goes completely against the observed phenomena. There's a book on paleoanthropology from Cambridge University, and I have sort of the picture up on my Instagram page, and it shows 2 skeletons, and one's much taller than the other, and it shows pre and post agriculture skeletons, and we were much taller before agriculture. Jaws were wider, teeth were less crowded. They didn't have crooked teeth. Everyone was getting their wisdom teeth. They didn't have rotting cavities or anything like that before agriculture. That after agriculture had all these signs of poor wound healing and infectious disease and all these things. And I'll read out the bottom of this to you, which it says, When populations around the globe started turning to agriculture around 10,000 years ago, regardless of their location and regardless of the type of crop, a similar trend occurred. The height and health of the people declined. Skeletal analysis suggests that these Neolithic peoples experienced greater physiological stress due to undernutrition and infectious disease. And we see this in real time right now with the Native Americans, the Native Australians, and I would say as well, those of sub-Saharan African descent. And this could explain, at least partially, the disparity in health outcomes between these populations and European populations who have had 10,000 years to adapt. Again, biology is about adaptation. So we adapted to stress. We've had about 10,000 years to adapt to stress. Certain populations have. Native Americans have not. Other populations have not. And so they're going to be more stressed by this, or they're going to get more sickened by this. So the idea that meat that we've been eating for 2 million years without any of this chronic disease, all of which had come in the 20th century, predominantly. Alzheimer's disease was described in the early 1900s. You made your name, you put your name down in history books by naming new phenomena that you saw. And Dr. Alzheimer, I know nothing else about that man and what he did with his entire life, except for the fact that he described Alzheimer's dementia. And that was in the early 1900s, I believe 1902. And in the medical literature, there were no diseases before that called by any other name that described that same pathology.
Wow.
That was a new disease. And the first heart attack, the first death by myocardial infarction was proven on autopsy in America was in 1912. And no one believed him. They thought, we've all looked at thousands, tens of thousands of autopsies and hearts and everything. We've never seen that as a cause of death. You must have gotten that wrong. They didn't believe him for about a decade because more and more started showing up. They're like, okay, there's a new disease coming around. This is something new. We've always been eating meat. We ate more meat in the 1800s than we did in the 1900s, certainly in the early 1900s when this became a problem. 10 years after that, in the 1930s, heart attack became the #1 killer in America. That was at a point where we were eating the least amount of meat in 200 years.
Wow.
We were eating very low meat in 1912, and we're eating even less meat in the 1920s and 30s when this became the #1 killer. And that was the lowest point for 200 years. It's sort of a U-shaped curve. So beginning of the 1800s, much more meat, and it sort of came down, and then it started coming up after sort of the 1940s, after World War II, it started coming back up. So the idea that meat is causing these diseases that simply did not exist until very recently is ludicrous. We've been eating meat forever. That's what's happened. That's known. We know that's safe. Eating plants is new. Eating this other crap is new. Eating seed oils is brand new.
Yeah.
Eating refined sugar is brand new. These highly refined carbohydrates are brand new. Then you look back at ancient Egypt, Eber's Papyrus is a medical document in the ancient Egypt. They described angina. They described heart attacks. They described diabetes, right? They were eating tons of wheat, tons of carbs, beer, things like that. They had, their statuary showed dudes with man boobs, gynecomastia, and beer guts, right? So the food is causing the problem, and we're blaming this on meat is just insane, because how can an ancient diet cause a new disease? We've been eating meat forever. This disease prevalence has increased, has only shown up very recently, and decade by decade by decade, it's getting worse, and we're eating less and less meat. We're vilifying meat. We're reducing cholesterol, reducing fat, reducing all these sorts of things, and yet all these diseases are getting worse, and they're still saying, got to eat less meat. Like, what is wrong with you? It's going the opposite direction. I mean, just look at what's happening in front of your face.
Yeah, it's all pretty scary. And to your point, you were saying whales and sharks and koala bears, don't. And I wrote in my book, hell, I probably wrote this 13 years ago because my book is at least 11 or 12 years old now. I said, look at it. The only unhealthy animals are the ones that we've domesticated, period. Yeah. Cats and dogs. You find a fat cat out in the wild. Doesn't exist. Find a fat wolf or coyote or any other form of canine out in the wild. You're not going to find it. But, we have dogs with cancer. We get dogs, they get lumps on them when they get older and the whole thing. It's from a really bad diet, right?
Yeah.
And, that's why, people always say, what do you feed your dogs? It's like, listen, we're an empty nest house and we've done okay for ourselves, we go nuts with our dogs, with what we feed it, because it's worth it for me not to pay those bills down the road. It's like the Fram oil commercial from the 1980s. You can pay me now or you can pay me later, right? I'd rather have a healthy dog until the day he dies versus, just chasing medical problem after medical problem while I'm some cheap crap out of a bag, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you go, oh, well, that's pretty hardy-toity. You're doing that with a dog. Yes, I'm using my dog as an example, but you're doing that with your health. Think about that. Just think about that for a moment, right? So there you have it. Anthony, I felt like I've kept you long enough. Tell people where they can find you. I know you have a podcast out there. You have all kinds of stuff. Let them know where you are.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's good to see you again, and thank you for having me on. So I have a podcast and a YouTube channel. My podcast is just called Plant Free MD, where I talk about diet, nutrition, how that affects health and chronic disease. And I also have a YouTube channel where all the video episodes of that would go to. It's also on Rumble. It's just both of those are just my name, Anthony Chaffee MD, and Instagram again, Anthony Chaffee MD. And I have other socials. I think Twitter is like Anthony_Chaffee, and that's pretty much the main ones. People can find me from there, but I try to post pretty much daily on Rumble and YouTube to try to get just different interviews and messages and pieces of information out there. And I try to back everything up and put studies and links and things like that in the description for people to see and then come to their own conclusions. I come to certain conclusions and I discuss that, and I base that on certain information. I try to provide that for people. And if they agree, then that's great. And if they don't, then that's fine too. But that's where I'm coming from anyway. I try to be very transparent with that.
All of that, folks, will be in the show notes. Leona will put that all in the show notes. Anthony, hang on. I want to say goodbye to you off the air. Folks, you know what to do with us. Before you go to Amazon, go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through the banner. It puts coal on the fire. It gets my train down the track. Also, rate and review this podcast, unless you're one of those vegans that listens just to go back and F with me online. I would appreciate if you guys would not rate and review me, because those reviews and rates are usually not very good. So you guys just take a knee while everyone else is giving me a rate and a review. On behalf of Dr. Anthony Chaffee, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with Allison in Chains. Allison Chains.